I'm Lisa Senecal.
And I'm Maya May, and tonight we're talking about the long overdue leadership revolution. We're speaking with guest Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. Starts now.
I am very ready and very excited to talk about a leadership revolution because it is feeling so unbelievably overdue at this point.
It's about damn time.
Yeah, it's about damn time. I have been for several decades now in the work world, and for not quite that long, but getting closer in politics. And we need a revolution in what leadership looks like. And it's always been hard. And I think it's still really hard for women to figure out what women's leadership is supposed to look like, because a lot of the time we are being pushed to kind of fit into the male model of what leadership's supposed to be. So we're like, supposed to be nice, but not too nice. We're supposed to be smart, but not too smart. Like, don't make the guys around feel like they're losing confidence for not being the smartest in the room. Supposed to be attractive, but don't be too attractive. Be assertive, but don't be a bitch. And dress appropriately, which I guess, like, at least in the 80s meant wear shoulder pads. I really don't understand what that means. It's like being told to dress my age. But it's all been the practice of fitting into the way things have been done. And I'm excited to talk about a paradigm shift.
Yeah, it's about time. And I can tell you, like, having been in the comedy world prior to this, it's a very male-dominated world, and I had to live and breathe this whole, be like this, be like that. And I remember I was sitting down, it was like maybe a few years into my career, and I was sitting with a fellow comic, white male, and I was like, hey, what set are you going to do tonight? And he's like, oh, the same set I always do. And I was like, huh. Wow, that's interesting. He doesn't mold and change and fit himself into every particular nook and cranny to try to exist. And so from that moment forward, I was like, I'm going to do that too, which it was very iffy at first, the results. But then as I started to claim my voice, the audiences started to come along. And so bottom line is it's a heck of a lot easier to just be ourselves and own it, which we're seeing that happen now with a lot of women in leadership. And it's pretty freaking awesome. But there's a roadmap for it. This isn't something something that we have to kind of figure out on our own. There are people who actually work in this space,
right?
So I'm excited about our guest tonight.
Our guest tonight, Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin, is CEO of the Gaia Project for Women's Leadership and the author of Becoming Heroines, Unleashing Our Power for Revolution and Rebirth. She works with individuals as well as corporations and nonprofit on the vital paradigm shift that is women's leadership. We've got to have this shift now. And she has some really interesting, strong thoughts on political leadership as well. And we're excited to get into that with her. So welcome, Elizabeth, to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Yes, you've hit the strange niche I occupy very well.
Well, right. It's a really important niche, and we all live it. So we're glad that you're creating kind of a leadership roadmap for women to follow and for men to get on board with too.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. One of the things that I think is really critical here is we can't neglect the fact that most of the leadership models throughout history are not just male dominated, but actually very masculine in the way that they operate. They're about conquering and competition and winning, as opposed to collaborative efforts to really kind of create change. And I mean that both in the C-suite and out there in the world. Obviously, one of the ways in which this is more easily accomplished is if men get on board with the fact that leadership can look like something other than what it has historically looked like. We all need allies, right? And we need allies who are really committed to doing it differently.
Absolutely. And Latasha Brown wrote about your book. She said a profound roadmap for how whole systems of oppression can die if we choose to do the work. And as you just sort of indicated, it takes work, not just from men, women, like everybody. It takes work. So as you see things transforming, like just even over the past month, are you seeing that people are starting to realize we have to do the work? What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things that I think folks have become a lot more aware of over the last couple of years is both our internalized sexism and our internalized white supremacy. And the fact that the culture that we're raised in naturally impacts the ways in which we act, our own thought processes, what we think is possible for us. And then there are kind of like shock the conscience moments in the culture that propel us forward, I want to say faster maybe than some of us are willing to ordinarily do that. And I happen to think that the Dobbs decision is one example of that. I think that one of the things that we've really seen since July is that a lot more women who have not been willing to be outspoken about their views, or maybe have not been even registered to vote, because the voter registration for new women voters, the stats are incredible right now since July, including in historically red states. I think those moments really encourage people to step out of their comfort zone. And also some of that is about consciously realizing that your voice really can make a difference, that the messages that we've been taught that maybe we need to be quiet, some of the things, Lisa, that you were pointing to in the beginning, these ways in which we've been taught to conform because that's what we've been taught success or winning looks like, those are really starting to fall away as people commit to making change and see the real urgency of this moment.
Well, I think a lot of what we're seeing in that, how those things were successful and really worked, was that they were successful and they really worked for men, but they really didn't work for women. And you mentioned the Dobbs decision. It seems like at the very least, the GOP and certainly the far right wing of it, but it's all the same at this point. Mm-hmm. They seem to have made this massive miscalculation that reversing Roe and all these new restrictions that they're trying to put on abortion it would be one of their mechanisms to push women back in the box that they really prefer that we be in. And how did they so grossly miscalculate what women's reaction to being shoved back in a box was going to be?
Well, look, I think that when you live in a bubble and the only people that you talk to are old white conservative men, chances are very solid that you don't really have a handle on what most women in this country think. The one thing that I will say about this, though, that has surprised even me is the pushback from independent and Republican women that we have seen now, because I think there's a lot of people who perhaps didn't consider that maybe if you had placenta previa, or you had a pregnancy emergency, or you had a fetus that was developing anomalies, that your right to terminate that as opposed to live through horrible things and potentially put your own life on the line, were also going to be at risk as a result of this. I think a lot of the consequences of a decision like this, of abortion as healthcare, were not really considered by a lot of people who were in that bubble. As opposed to the rest of us who have been shouting about this since, say, 2015. So for me, the thing that I have, that I'm a little curious about, and I have to say that I am a little suspicious of some of this stuff because so many folks thought that Hillary was going to win in 2016 and that it was going to be a women's revolution. I really am waiting to see what happens until November, and I have no intention of taking my foot off the gas until we're through the midterms on this issue, and hopefully we have the Women's Health Protection Act passed. But I will say that I think the underestimation is about the fact that they don't listen to anybody except their own people. And when you look at the polling and you look at the stats that say that 75% of the country believes some form of abortion should be accessible, you can only deny that statistic if you're hearing from other people exactly the same views that you already hold.
I'm so glad that you touched on the listening aspect of things, because as we go into these final, I think it's 49 days right now to the midterms, how can we be better listeners? Because that seems to be a leadership quality that women do have. But how do we go about listening even to the people who are apolitical, who are deciding they think they want to sit this out? What are some things that we can do?
That is such a great question. You know, one of the things that I do in our leadership consulting work is I talk to people who are running for office, and I also help women who are mobilizing around particular candidates or particular campaigns. One of the things that we have found to be really successful in the work that we've done with women who are, say, first-time candidates for office or are first-time canvassers or organizers is that it's really helpful when you're approaching someone who is apolitical to talk to them about what their needs are, to really engage in the deep canvassing strategies about like, what are the things that you really care about? What are the things you care about in your community? Because all politics is local. One of the stories I like to tell is that we worked with a candidate who was running for office for the first time in Columbia, South Carolina for a local position. She's very far left, ex-yoga teacher, extremely progressive. One would imagine that in South Carolina, she might not have that much traction. Her whole campaign was structured around talking to her potential constituents about what they really cared about. And it turned out that some of that was about like the cost of their electricity, some of it, and that created an opening for talking about alternative energy sources. Some of it was about traffic patterns. And when people who were apolitical could see the ways in which her candidacy would impact them day to day in the ways that they cared about, regardless of political party, that motivated people to get invested and involved. And, you know, the other thing that I will just say is that the most recent studies that have been done on interaction and voter turnout show that it's those one-on-one conversations that change people's minds. It's not going to be a political ad. It's not going to be me ranting on Twitter, which I've been known to do from time to time. It's those intimate conversations you have with your neighbors and your friends and the people who live near you that have been shown statistically to jack up voter turnout by up to 4.5%. And that's enough to change a lot of elections. So we really recommend from the listening standpoint that you approach it with an active listening perspective. Ask open-ended questions. Ask your neighbors what they're worried about, what they care about, what they want from their elected officials. And then talk about how your candidate or your party, because, you know, I mean, that works sometimes too, will help to move the needle forward on those issues. I really feel right now, and what I've been really motivating our clients and our audience to do is to really get local right now. You know, get local, work with the organizations that are already established and on the ground who have built local relationships. And this, you know, it needs to happen not just on the national level, because it's school boards we're talking about. Right. It's water boards. It's, you know, local city councils and county councils that are influencing all sorts of forms of policy. And those are also, not to mention, very serious targets right now for the far right. So the more that we can engage our neighbors in really serious, deep canvassing conversations about the issues that matter, the more likely we are to make an impact.
Yeah, the thing you were just describing is one of those key things that candidates have always been tested on, which is whether the candidate comes across as caring about people like me. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of candidates have gotten away from that. Mm-hmm. And it what you're saying is so incredibly important, and it's really effective. Now, part of the way the GOP seems right now to be showing that they care about people like them is through cruelty. And instead of showing, you know, I care about you, I'm going to show I don't care about someone else as much as you don't care about them. So we see horrible things happening, like Ron DeSantis, I guess, taking up human trafficking now as a political stunt. And I have every reason to believe he is going to continue doing it because the price, I don't know, we're going to see the prices high enough for him to stop. But with that kind of stuff going on, it's pretty clear that a lot of these Republican candidates don't have that concern that a lot of women do about being liked. And it's hard to look at where they are right now and say it doesn't work for them. I don't want women or people on the left to try to take those kind of approaches on, but is there anything that we can learn? Do people see that as authenticity?
No, I mean, I think we got to be really clear about this. What they're about is power. They don't want to govern. They don't want to lead. They want power over other people. And honestly, one of the things that I find so shocking about the moment that we're in right now is that for me, and I've been a political animal since I was very, very young. I grew up in a hardcore Democratic family where politics were discussed at the dinner table when I was 5 years old. One of the things that is shocking to me is the way in which there is not even a veneer of a claim to public service in the GOP right now. Their entire political dominion is based on fear. And the targets of that fear, let's make no mistake about it, are in large part white suburban mothers. Because one of the things that they're pointing at is, school teachers are teaching your children all these horrible things. They're teaching white kids to hate themselves. They're teaching, about transgender conformity in kindergarten, all these lies. None of this is true, right? And for me, it's very personal. I have a non-binary child. And so the ways in which this all plays out directly impacts my kid, right? It directly impacts my family. I personally think that one of the ways that we decimate this is by pointing out to people that literally all that they are about is creating fear. It's generating fear. They don't want to serve your family. They're not really in it to make your life better. They're here to create fear. They want you to be afraid of other people. And the reality of where we find ourselves right now is that, between climate change, the political issues that we care about, the ways in which all of these issues are at the forefront right now, whether it's LGBTQ rights, whether it's issues related to racial equality, whether it's issues related to gender identity and gender equality. There's such an important need for us all to recognize now that we're in it together because they're coming for all of us. It's not like any one group of us is going to be left out. It is all about making sure that white, cis, rich men are protected and everybody else is out the door. So, to me, I think the key here is actually that we have to lead from a place of love and connection. One of the things that I'm really keen on when I work with our women leader clients is about creating understanding of the ways in which we are similar, the ways in which across identities and issues and movements, our interests are so much the same. And so I really think that one of the keys here in the context of canvassing and work toward November and all of that is that buying into the idea that, for instance, it's all doom and gloom is actually not necessarily going to be our winning strategy. Our winning strategy is about here's how this party creates the opportunity as a big tent, because don't get me wrong, there are things I disagree with in certain aspects of the Democratic Party. I'm very progressive and very left. But one of the things that I think is really key here is saying to people there's room for everybody here and we're working to benefit all of the nation. This is a party, this is a movement that cares about everyone. And there's room for everyone in it. Rather than doing what they seek to do, and what they've done honestly quite successfully in ways that I find terrifying, frankly, is to divide and conquer, right? Yeah. To split various groups of women from one another, to split trans women from cis women, to split Black women from white women and Indigenous women and Latino women, to split all of us off separately by identity and then weaponize it against us. I happen to think that this is a moment where if we don't focus on what pulls us together and that we're all connected and the nation rises or falls as one, we can't win. So that to me is what it's really about. And I frankly am not, I'm only interested in accountability for the people who are playing with the politics of fascism, which frankly, I think is exactly what Ron DeSantis is doing, forced relocation of, unwanted populations of people is a hallmark of fascism. It's, how Nazi Germany got its start. And I don't think we should be under any illusions that they are showing us exactly who they are.
They absolutely.
And so that, frankly, is to step up and be arm in arm with one another across every identity that is impacted and marginalized and show up for one another and fight. That's really, to me, what it's all about.
I love that you made it personal, because a lot of times we forget that politics is very, very personal. And so a lot of parents of these groups that I call them fear groups and hate groups, they call themselves parent advocacy groups. And I say, who are you advocating for? You're assuming that all families want what you want. And that's not the case. You have a non-binary child. I have a trans child. There is this assumption when they're talking to groups of parents, and this includes Republican parents, they're assuming that that family isn't perhaps a blended family, that there's a mix of genders in that family. And so I think that's a big mistake on their part, because they're seeing the, kind of backlash, and it's like, hey, you're attacking my child, and maybe you don't know because my child's not out. And so I'm hoping that, like you said, this coalition of women are going to come together and say, hey, we don't want to raise our children with fear. We want to raise our children with hope, because hope is what gets us through. And again, if they're not creating these wedges, if the GOP isn't creating these wedges, they don't actually exist. Like, our kids are kind of getting along just fine with each other, and it's the adults who are like, hey, we're going to make you a policy issue now, and that's creating kind of this all of this stress and angst. And it's like, no, it's like, we're just trying to live our lives right now.
Yeah, exactly. And I will say that has been my kids' experience at school. I mean, granted, I live in California where there's all these fantastic legal protections, and I feel very lucky, frankly, to live in a place where, like, our principal is overtly committed to making sure that the school is as far removed from Florida-style public schooling as possible. But I will also just add that I think that the opposition, and I think this is a point that we all should recognize, is very, very loud, but a lot smaller than it appears. One of the things that we've experienced here in our little neck of the woods in California are these kind of astroturfed protests where Moms for Liberty, which happens to be one of these organizations that is astroturfing a lot of this stuff, finds one or two parents locally who are of a far-right position. They arm them with talking points, and then literally they get people from other communities, not our community, not our school district, to swarm in to protest. And the reality is that the parents who live here, who know our kids, who, I live in a very multiracial area, who are committed to our diversity and inclusion of everyone, are outraged by the fact that people who don't even live here are showing up and making it look as though we are something that we're not. And so the other thing that I would just say here is that, there are a lot of these so-called wedge positions that you're pointing to, Maya, that actually I think are just really weaponized yelling. That the vast majority of Americans actually really think that kids should be loved and they should be accepted, and that there's room for everyone. And, while all of us may be on our own journey of unpacking the way in which white supremacy lives in us, the way in which trans and homophobia may live in us, nonetheless, I think that there's a lot of folks out there who, if asked the question, if you had a gay child, if you had a trans child, would you want that child to be accepted? Would you want that child to go to school and feel safe? Is going to say yes, right? We've only had like maybe one or two instances of bullying here in the entire elementary school for my child. And, I think that is a testament to the fact that the vast majority of parents who are raising children across diversities in diverse communities see this for what it is, And so I think we've also got to start emphasizing that there are so many more of us than them. And I mean this on so many issues, right? There's so many more of us who believe that abortion is a fundamental right than the people on the other side of the fence. There's so many more of us who believe in participatory democracy and the safe transition of power and the importance of making sure that we have representative government, right? Than what we see on the other side. And the unfortunate fact is that the GOP has managed to have a stranglehold from the far right on their positions right now. I frankly am like of a vote them all out mentality right now, because I don't think the party as it stands right now can survive this. And I frankly don't think they should, because they're not representative. But the reality is that I think we've also got to get really grounded in the fact that we have power. Speaking of Latasha, this is one of the things that she talks about. And, I'm so lucky to count her as a friend and a mentor, and somebody who has taught me an awful lot over the last 5 years that we've known each other, because we underestimate our ability to create change, women in particular, because we have all that internalized misogyny that says our voices don't matter. I'm just one person. I can't make a difference. I think we've really got to get clear on the fact that our collective power is enormous. And if we can tap it and use it and work together, real change is possible. And I'm not even talking about like bending the arc over decades. I mean, like, we could have really serious change in November that would guarantee the codification of the right to abortion in America, the passage of the Freedom to Vote Act, all sorts of other expansions that, the Biden administration has been saying it wanted from day one. will become possible for us. But it's really got to be about us recognizing that, like, we are the majority.
Right.
We who care about our children and about our democracy and about our country and about equity and equality and freedom, like, we're the majority in this country. So, so it's time to kind of like own our own revolutionary capacity, which, by the way, is what my book is about.
Right. And we say that a lot here at the Lincoln Project, that there are more of us than there are of them. But you make a really important point that they are loud, and that volume that they put out, I think, is really intimidating. It's worked incredibly effectively within their own party to intimidate people into submission, who, so many of whom we would have thought would have had the guts to be able to stand up and say what was right, because they damn well know what's right and they're not. But they're not going to do it for us. So we need to do it for ourselves. What advice do you have? Because I think there are a lot of, especially women, who are very hesitant about owning their voices and stepping out and being loud and really taking a stand for, you know, whether it's because of acceptance or what they think the backlash is going to be. You're very public. You do this all the time. Maya and I know what the backlash can be. And you know what?
So do I.
We're all still here. We're all still here. We're okay. And backing down and cowering is not the answer. So how do you encourage more women to do what you're doing?
Yeah. So I have to say that I feel like this is kind of like working a muscle. And one of the things that I always have to say to people is, you do not have to reinvent the wheel. There are networks on the ground where you live. Even in the reddest of red states, there are Democrats who are committed to working toward electing Democratic candidates. The issue for me is that I think a lot of people, and I think particularly white women, it's part of that like white savior complex, think that you have to like swoop in and do it all yourself. I actually think that the more effective way for us to build coalitions right now is to show up and follow the people who are already doing it well. Like, for instance, the National Network of Abortion Funds, which is largely run by Black and brown women, trans women, non-binary people. They have an incredible network of more than 90 abortion funds all over the country, and they are funding abortion care for people who live in states where abortions are currently illegal. The work they do is incredible. And, you know, I was on a call with them several months ago, right on the eve of the Dobbs decision. They were like, we need money. All we need is money. If you can go out there and fundraise for us, that's going to make a huge difference, because we turn away 40% of the people who need us every month. And so some of this is about showing up for the organizations that are already doing it right and saying, how can I help you? How can I serve here? And again, listening is a really good theme on this, because if you show up and say, I want to be of service, what can I do? I want to help elect this candidate. I want to push this issue, gun safety, forward. I want to push forward the issue of honesty and education. The organizations that are already doing that are there. And, you know, you don't have to be front and center on this. You don't have to be, you know, I'm very extroverted, obviously. I'm perfectly comfortable on a street corner with a sign or here with all of you talking about all of this. Lots of people aren't. And, you know, lots of people also are homebound. And I have to account for, you know, when I talk to people, we have a lot of people in our community who are disabled. There are all sorts of ways to be of service that do not require you to be out in front of the crowd. Maybe you're writing postcards to voters, right? Maybe you're making phone calls, you're text banking from your couch. There are all sorts of ways at the moment to serve an issue or to serve a cause or a candidate. And all you have to do is really show up and ask. So one of the things that I say to folks is, you can start small. Say, I'm going to dedicate an hour a week to this. I'm going to find an issue that I care about. I'm going to volunteer with the Frontline, which does incredible text banking like every week. And I'm going to give them an hour on my Tuesday night for candidates that matter to me. And they'll guide you through it. There's training available. Indivisible does the same thing, right? Like, so many of these great organizations will literally walk you through it step by step. You know, I do have to say that the one thing that I have to say to everyone is, it's never too late. You are not too old to make a difference. You should never assume that just as one person, you can't make a difference. You know, like 6 years ago, I was just a corporate consultant, recovering Wall Street lawyer. And I started talking about this stuff online. And the next thing I knew, I had 100,000 people watching me every day. That's an example of things that can happen if you're ready to actually step into a role like that. But it's not required. What really matters here is showing up in the ways that you can show up for the things that you care about with the gifts that you have. And it's not, again, everybody has to do what they can. Nobody's saying like, throw your whole life over. Some of us are raising kids. I'm a single mom, right? I do what I can. And I think the real key issue here is just start. If you have not been involved before, this is a really critical key moment to just show up, have a couple phone conversations with people through a phone bank. Like I said, do some text banking from your couch. Show up at your kid's baseball game with flyers for the candidate that you care about and hand them out to other parents and say, this is somebody I'd like you to consider. It can be really easy and really simple and really low stakes. On the last point, on the point of like, you're going to feel pushback, you might. And I have to say, like, no change ever comes from doing what you can't please everybody all the time, and somebody's not going to like you. Those of us who are out in front get attacked all the time with sexist attacks. The Black women activists that I work with put up with an unbelievable amount of abuse and continue to do it, and shouldn't be like that, right? But I will tell you that, to me, at least my view of it at this moment in time is that democracy matters too much, rights matter too much. If I get booted out of a parent chat, which happened to me in 2020, for saying to people, you really should show up for this issue in this particular way because it really matters, that is a small price to pay for the few people that I may be able to positively influence to get out and vote, to show up for causes that matter, and to make a difference.
Thank you so much for saying that, because we are really in a moment where our lives are at stake. Lives are at stake. And if we don't all show up in the ways that we can, we're going to find ourselves on November 9th going, oh, wow, what could I have done? So that being said, and we have to wrap up here, but I do want to hear your take on balance and how you're able to, because I know a lot of people watching are going, we feel like we're alone in this sometimes, even though we see a bunch of people on Twitter tweeting about it and we talk to people about it, but sometimes it's like, you feel so alone. What is your recommendation for being able to pace oneself or balance through the midterms and beyond?
Oh, it's such a fantastic question, because I will tell you, a lot of the activists I work with right now are really burnt out. And this conversation of how we keep going is something that's kind of constantly in the atmosphere in every conversation I have. So I will tell you that for the last 18 months, and really since the beginning of the COVID pandemic, I've been advocating for people to build mutual aid networks where they live, which means that if you're having a really rough day and somebody needs to take your kids so that you can have a day off, you've got somebody who can do that. If you're really invested in a campaign or an issue and you can't cook dinner, you've got a neighbor who's going to show up. Like I have this fantastic Brazilian neighbor who makes like beans and rice for me a couple of times a month. And I just get like these tins at my door that let me know that I'm cared for, right? That I'm seen. I think we need to stop trying to do it all alone and learn how to accept help and believe me, this is a journey for me as well. But to understand that while we are building these local community-based political efforts, those are not just for like getting out the vote. They're actually about our collective survival, and when we think about things like climate crisis events, or we think about things like the pandemic, if you don't know your neighbors and you don't have a circle of people that you can count on in an emergency, you should build it, because we all need to be there for one another. And that to me right now is honestly like my biggest survival strategy. I have a group of maybe like 10 women here, most of whom are also single moms, where we show up for each other and we check in. And yes, we mobilize and we organize and we yell on Twitter and we do all those things, but we also show up for each other in really intimate and personal ways to make sure that our needs are getting met. And, I'll also just add, I'm really big right now on not ignoring what's going on in our bodies, because a lot of women I know are showing really serious physical stress ailments right now as a result of what we're living through. So also, like all the advice that we always give each other about taking care of yourself, I think is more critical than it ever has been. I think we need to know how to ask and reach out for mental health care and mental support when we need it. And also to make sure that we're taking breaks, because the image I love to use of this is geese and the way that they fly, and they take turns being at the head of that flock and breaking the headwinds. And if we can each rotate out of that, we cheer each other on from the back, we take the front lead sometimes, we stop and we take a rest when we need to. That's how we succeed. It's a marathon and not a sprint. So I think in collective action and collective care is where we find the way to keep going.
Love that.
Wow. Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin, I am so honored that you were here with us this evening. This has been an incredibly important conversation. I hope people watch this more than once and take notes, because there's just so much important in what you're saying, and it has really, it is going to have really tangible impacts on what we end up waking up to on November 9th. So thank you very much for being here with us.
You're so welcome. It's been a privilege.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we might be neighbors. I'm California local. So if we are, I'm a single mom. I want in that group. So
yes, absolutely.
There's always room for one more.
You got it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. I do. I heard that was like community support. It's funny because when we get together, we often do think that it's always about trying to save democracy. But if we're trying to save democracy and we're not also saving ourselves, what's the point? And so bringing community back and connectivity, like right now, I'm like, I'm going to go knock on all my neighbors' doors and make some friends.
Yeah, I love that she had such a focus on all of those, that we all have competing priorities and different things that we might have slight disagreements on. But overall, the vast majority of us in this country, not just within the Democratic Party, but in this country, we agree on a tremendous number of things. And the Republicans have been able to take a few bits of ugliness and use those as a glue to hold together a really sick, disturbing, but powerful coalition. We can be more powerful than that on our side. We have more numbers, and my God, love wins. And we just have to focus in on that, take care of each other, and make sure we are carrying each other to the polls on November 8th.
Yeah, absolutely. And hydrated as well. Don't forget to hydrate. Yes. An important part of the process. Oh, thank you so much for everyone for being with us tonight. Oh yes, we have our mugs, our Be Kind.
Yeah, we're
double, if you
double
can't
fisting at this point, folks.
Be Kind of, well, you can see what it says. I'm not going to say it out loud.
Be kind of
but thank everybody. Seriously, we couldn't do all of this without you. The Lincoln Project couldn't do this without you. If you're able to donate, please do so. You can do so at our website. You make our programming possible, and we're trying to put out a lot of content right now to help people get through these moments. So if you can, go ahead and donate. Also join the union. We need more volunteers for that as well.
Yes, join the union.us. What she was talking about, this finding places on the local level to be able to do the work, that's what Join the Union enables you to do. It will this organization that the Lincoln Project's working with will help connect you to all of those different organizations where you can be having local impact. If that's what you're looking for, you can have a broader impact on larger issues, but it's a hub to be able to get you and your skills where they're going to be able to be really effective. So go to jointheunion.us and join tomorrow the breakdown. Tara Setmayer is going to be back with the Rick Wilson at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 Pacific. And before we take off tonight, the GOP is putting out another contract on America.
Watch out for it.
Watch out. Here's our latest ad.
Good night.
Remember this guy's contract with America? How'd that go? In a few days, the MAGAs will try to sell you another contract for America. Everything they're promising is already happening with President Biden. An economy that works for all Americans? Check. Record job growth. Good paying jobs growing our economy. That's Biden, not MAGA. Peace through strength. Ask Ukraine who stands with them and who stands with Russia. Energy independence? Yeah, Biden's got that. Safe and secure communities? Check. Millions to improve policing, protecting our communities and civil rights. Fight to end government corruption and drain the swamp? Who are they kidding? For 7 years, they left us holding the bag and paying the bill for their reckless spending and bad ideas. Their new contract with America? Promises they'll never keep. But Joe Biden and the Democrats deliver.